Did Ken Burns just prove the founders right? Ken Burns spent 12 hours and 9 years proving that the founders were right about the American Revolution, but not in the way he intended, in the way that they warned us about. Hey folks, I'm Tad Sturmer. I'm a public historian and scholar of the American Revolution and Resistance at the University of Southern Denmark and the author of A Resistance History of the United States. Burns has said repeatedly that the American Revolution was the most important event since the birth of Christ. His promotional tour was a barnstorm of superlatives. This would help Americans understand exactly why we came together. This would put the us back in the U.S. This would be national therapy through origin story. But now it's over. What did he actually prove? That the story of the American Revolution cannot be told. That the war will always swallow the revolution. That 200 years of warnings from the people who made the thing go ignored because we keep hiring nationalist storytellers to tell core audiences what they want to hear. There is nothing more common than to confound the terms of the American Revolution with those of the late American War. Benjamin Rush wrote that in January of 1787. He went on to say that the American War is over, but this is far from being the case with the American Revolution. On the contrary, nothing but the first act of the great drama is closed. John Adams was, characteristically, more blunt. Writing to Hezekiah Niles in 1818, he asked, "What do we mean by the American Revolution? Do we mean the American War? The Revolution was effected before the war commenced. The Revolution was in the minds and hearts of the people." Adams meant it literally. He said that the radical change in the principles, opinions, and sentiments and affections of the people, that was the real American Revolution. And it happened, he insisted, from 1760 to 1775, the course of 15 years, as he said, before a drop of blood was drawn at Lexington. The war for Adams was, in his words again, no part of the revolution. It was only an effect and consequence of the revolution. A year earlier, he wrote to a friend that the true history of the American Revolution is lost forever. Nothing but misrepresentations or partial accounts of it would ever be recovered. Writing to Thomas Jefferson about the subject, Jefferson agreed. The councils, designs, discussions, everything that drove the revolution were the life and soul of history, and they must forever be unknown. Who would be able to write a history of the revolution? Nobody, said Jefferson. They were all warning about exactly what Burns delivered. A war documentary, 12 hours of battles, generals, George Washington, just now more problematic. The transformation of political consciousness that Adams called the real American Revolution, how it was formed, how it was contested, how it evolved, made a servant to the war story that has always been easier to film and always much more attractive to Burns. What's weird, though, and let's sit with this for a second, is that Burns almost certainly knows better. I mean, his team found what working historians have found for decades exploring the subject. One of his co-directors, Sarah Botstein, put it plainly. One is this huge revolution of ideas and how a government might be structured, who might lead that government, and the other is a terribly brutal, very complicated 18th century war. What Adams pointed out, two distinct things, revolution, war, ideas, bloodshed. Burns' team discovered what Rush and Adams knew in the 1780s and what modern historians of the revolution are trained to see. But what did Burns do with this knowledge? And this is the key question. He chose, as Botstein described it, to braid the two together, to make a choice. The revolution or the war. He chose the war. And in making that choice, he joined a long line of nationalist storytellers, from David Ramsay in the 1780s to George Bancroft in the 19th century, who have consistently punted on the revolution in favor of the war because the war serves a nationalist purpose and the revolution threatens it. You can't, in fact, braid them. The war always wins. It has to. War is visual, battle is dramatic, sacrifice is moving. The transformation of political consciousness that Adams described, ordinary colonials rethinking their relationship to authority, enslaved people recognizing that human rights includes them, everyone questioning inherited obligations, developing new theories of legitimate government on both sides of the Atlantic, isn't any of those things. It doesn't film well. It doesn't lend itself to drone shots and musket fire and celebrity voice actors reading letters. Another of Burns' co-directors, David Schmidt, let slip what the documentary actually prioritizes. He said that their goal was to show how the war was won not just through ideas, but through hardship, adaptation, and military ingenuity. Note the construction. Ideas are just a qualifier. Military ingenuity is the substance, but the war is the focus. Schmidt was even more revealing when he admitted that Republic, Union, and Independence were kind of outcomes of the war rather than goals. At the start, Americans were trying to liberate Boston, to get a redress of grievances, and to bring things back to the way they were under the British Empire. Thanks for dismissing it, but yeah, no shit, that mattered. The New England Patriots had articulated a concept of their rights, identified how the British were abusing it, and pushed in direct resistance against that abuse of authority to roll it back and shove it out. Not for independence, not for union, for their rights, something bigger and more interesting than a political outcome. But think about Schmidt's characterization. It's a complete inversion of Adams' framework. Adams said the revolution happened before the war, in minds and in hearts. Schmidt specifically says that Union, independence were also not the revolution, but just outcomes of the war emerging from military necessity. The war produces the political goals. The effect becomes the cause, and none of them relate to the actual revolution. And that's what the series proves. And that's what nationalist historiography does. It makes the founding inevitable. It collapses distinct events, resistance, revolution, independence, war, constitution, into a single linear necessary arc that serves present purposes, modern purposes. The revolution becomes just prologue to the war becomes prologue to the nation, and the nation becomes the point of the story, which is why Burns keeps calling it our origin story and promising it will heal our divisions. An NPR reviewer noticed what Burns actually made. Battles are the surprisingly dominant ingredient of this series. The American Revolution goes into more detail about individual battles than anybody ever learned in their own American history classes. True enough. 36 battle sequences. The Hollywood Reporter noted that asymmetry. The documentary frequently over-explains the war's fascinating but simple to comprehend ironies on one hand, and then rushes through the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights. The fight for which many patriots considered their final battle of the American Revolution. Dispatched almost in passing. The Constitution covered in minutes after hours of military campaigns. Because Burns wasn't making a documentary about the American Revolution. He was making a documentary about the Revolutionary War, and then attaching the revolution to it like a hood ornament. This is exactly what Rush warned about. Confounding the revolution with the war, treating them as synonyms when they are distinct phenomena with different chronologies, different participants, different meanings. And PBS tried this before. Think back to 1997. Liberty aired on PBS then. 6 episodes. Yo-Yo Ma, also on the soundtrack. No Rhiannon Giddens, more's the pity, but Wynton Marsalis is there. Actors giving voice to soldiers, Philip Seymour Hoffman and Joseph Plum Martin. But the same exact arc, the same exact attention to the events within that arc, from pre-war tensions through Yorktown to the Constitution. Now, Burns doubled the runtime and changed nothing that matters. Both series even share an episode title, The Times That Try Men's Souls. Really? Same structure, same nationalist framing, same results. A war documentary wearing revolutionary clothing. Now, that comparison isn't meant to diminish Burns' craft. He's a master storyteller. Everyone can agree with that. I just mean to expose the trap, or rather, the choice that presents itself as a trap. When you approach the American Revolution through prestige documentary television with a nationalist framework and therapeutic intentions intended for a liberal nationalist audience, you make a war documentary every time. Because you're not actually interested in the revolution. You're interested in the nation, and the war is how the nation gets made. Burns is explicit about that. His therapeutic language saturates the promotion of the series. He said that when somebody goes into crisis, they go to a pastor or a professional, and that person will almost invariably ask, where'd you come from? Who are your parents? What was your childhood like? And you begin to reassemble and put back together your fragile, fractured narrative of yourself by studying your own origin story. People and countries are the same, and so you go to a historian when your nation is in crisis. There it is. National therapy. The country on the couch. Ken Burns as analyst. The revolution is origin story that explains our present dysfunction and points toward healing. Put the us back in the U.S. I got news for you. Our job as historians is to get it right, not to make you feel better about it, about any of it. And the American Revolution, as Adams understood it, is especially untherapeutic. It's destabilizing. A revolution in minds and hearts, all people, no matter their skin color or servitude, questioning inheriting authority. developing new theories of obligation, deciding that allegiance and protection are reciprocal, and that withdrawing that protection dissolves allegiance, from the Continental Congress to black loyalists. That's not a story that brings people together around shared founding myths. That's a story about how people tear political orders apart when those orders fail them. John Adams knew this. Revolutions are no trifles, he wrote Denials. They ought never to be undertaken rashly, nor without deliberate consideration and sober reflection, nor without a solid, immutable, eternal foundation of justice and humanity. As the United States approached the 50th anniversary of independence, seemingly unaware of what it all meant, Adams wanted young historians to investigate the means and the measures by which 13 distinct colonies, all with their own thing going on, came to share enough principles to move them on to what was next. Not because it would be heartwarming, though, but because they might be useful. They may be of use to posterity, he said, not only to this nation, but in South America and in other countries. Adams saw the revolution as instruction, not nostalgia, a manual for how political consciousness transforms. But Burns sees it as therapy, which is why he needs the war. Therapy requires narrative closure. The patient gets better. The nation gets born. We need to understand why we came together and feel reassured that we can come together again. The revolution, properly understood, offers no such reassurance. It tells you that political orders fail, that subjects become citizens through their own action and inaction, that the transformation happens in minds before it happens on battlefields. It's a story about the withdrawal of legitimacy, not the support of it, about how authority gets questioned and discarded. Not exactly the message you lead with if your goal is national healing. So Burns buries it. Not through ignorance. His team found the distinction, named it clearly, understood the historiographical stakes, and then made a choice. And it's the choice national storytellers have made since the beginning. Braid the revolution to the war. Let the war carry the narrative weight. Use the revolution as emotional texture and ideological seasoning. Then call the result our origin story and promise it will heal us. Adams predicted this. Jefferson predicted this. Rush predicted this. They told us the true history would be lost, that nothing but misrepresentations and partial accounts would survive, that people would confound the revolution with the war and mistake the effect for the cause. Burns had every advantage. 9 years, $30 million, access to scholarship that Adams and Jefferson couldn't imagine, historians on camera, the founders' own warnings in front of him. And he still couldn't do it. Or rather, he chose not to. Because doing it would have meant abandoning the nationalist therapeutic framework that organizes his entire project. It would have meant making a documentary about political consciousness rather than military sacrifice. It would have meant telling Americans something other than what they want to hear about their origins. The war is over. Burns' series about the war is over. But the revolution. As Rush wrote in 1787, nothing but the first act of the great drama is closed. Drama queen, Benjamin Rush. But the revolution keeps going. The ongoing question of political legitimacy, the tension between authority and resistance, the problem of how people think themselves into new political arrangements. That story remains untold, and Burns was never going to tell it. He was telling a different story, about a nation that needed to be born and a war that birthed it. The founders knew someone would. They warned us anyway, and they were right. The good thing is that revolution is still waiting for its storyteller. Who's it going to be?